Welcome, dear viewers. Join us on an exhilarating journey dedicated to the unsung heroes who go above and beyond to protect the innocent. With your support, we can shed light on their remarkable stories and inspire others to stand up for justice. Don't miss out on thrilling episodes. Hit that subscribe button and become part of our dedicated community. Together, let's make a difference. Before us lies a tale divided into two enthralling parts. In the first segment, we delve into the remarkable life of Detective William J. Burns, a figure shrouded in legend and intrigue. Then, brace yourselves as we embark on a chilling quest to unravel the mystery behind Mary Fagan's tragic demise. This video promises to be a riveting exploration of crime, investigation, and the relentless pursuit of truth. So, without further ado, let's dive into the enigmatic world of Detective Burns and the Mary Fagan case. William John Burns was a notable figure in American law enforcement, often dubbed America's Sherlock Holmes for his keen investigative skills. Born on October 19, 1861, in Baltimore, Maryland, he later received his education in Columbus, Ohio. From a young age, Burns showed promise as a Secret Service agent, excelling in his duties. With time, he established the William J. Burns International Detective Agency, which eventually became part of Securitas Security Services USA. Throughout his career, Burns garnered fame for his involvement in various high-profile cases. One such instance was his role in clearing Leo Frank of the 1913 murder of Mary Fagan. He also undertook investigations into significant incidents, such as the 1910 Los Angeles Times bombing, orchestrated by members of the International Association of Bridge, Structural, Ornamental, and Reinforcing Iron Workers. His reputation for solving complex cases propelled him into the limelight, making him a national figure. His exploits regularly made headlines across the country, from the bustling streets of New York City to the pages of detective magazines where he shared true crime stories based on his experiences. Notably, Burns served as the director of the Bureau of Investigation, BOI, the precursor to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, from August 22, 1921, to May 10, 1924. Throughout his career, Burns's combination of innate detective talent and flair for publicity ensured his lasting legacy in American law enforcement. Burns's personal life was also notable. He married Annie M. Ressler in 1880, and together they raised 6 children. 2 of their sons, Raymond J. and William Sherman, followed in their father's footsteps, becoming detectives for the William J. Burns National Detective Agency. When Burns assumed the role of director of the Bureau of Investigation on August 22, 1921, he maintained his involvement in the Burns Detective Agency. Despite his responsibilities as director, he ensured that his private agency continued to operate effectively. During his tenure, Burns implemented changes within the Bureau, reducing its personnel from 1,127 to 600 by 1923. Notably, he broke barriers by hiring the first female special agents, Alaska P. Davidson in 1922 and Jessie B. Duckstein in 1923. However, Burns's career faced challenges, particularly due to his close ties with President Warren Harding's Attorney General, Harry M. Daugherty. At Daugherty's behest, Burns launched an investigation into Montana Senator Thomas J. Walsh, ostensibly for criminal activities. In reality, the investigation served as retaliation against Walsh for opposing oil leases granted by Daugherty's friend, Secretary of the Interior Albert Fall. As scrutiny intensified, Burns faced pressure from Congress. His refusal to cooperate with congressional investigators led to further inquiries into the Bureau of Investigation. Revelations of misconduct within the agency, known as the Daugherty-Burns scandal, became sensationalized in the media. In a bid to salvage the Bureau's reputation, Attorney General Harlan Fiske Stone requested Burns's resignation in 1924. Consequently, on May 10, 1924, J. Edgar Hoover assumed the position of director of the Bureau of Investigation on an interim basis, marking the end of Burns's tenure. Despite his significant contributions to law enforcement, Burns's career ended amidst controversy and scandal. Despite his resignation from the Bureau of Investigation, Burns remained active in the realm of private investigation. In October 1924, the CPUSA's Daily Worker newspaper reported that Jacob Spolensky, a recent BOI resignee, had joined the Burns Detective Agency, led by the renowned King of Dicks, Bill Burns. Burns found himself entangled in the infamous Teapot Dome scandal, a case involving the clandestine leasing of naval oil reserve lands to private companies. In November 1927, during the trial of Harry Sinclair for conspiracy to defraud the U.S. in the Teapot Dome leasing, Burns was covertly hired by Sinclair's associate, Henry Mason Day. Day enlisted Burns's agency to investigate the jurors, aiming to sway the trial in Sinclair's favor. However, the government's investigators uncovered Burns's clandestine operation midway through the trial, prompting an immediate mistrial. In subsequent proceedings, Sinclair's defense asserted that the juror surveillance was intended to shield them from external influences, denying direct contact between Burns's operatives and the jurors. Despite this defense, Sinclair was convicted on corruption charges and sentenced to 6 months in jail, with Day receiving 4 months imprisonment. Burns himself faced consequences, serving a 15-day sentence, while his son, William Sherman Burns, was ordered to pay a $1,000 fine. Burns promptly appealed his conviction, leading to a reversal by the Supreme Court in Sinclair v. United States, 1929. Following his retirement from the Burns Detective Agency, Burns relocated to Florida. There, he spent several years writing detective and mystery stories inspired by his extensive career. Tragically, Burns passed away from a heart attack in Sarasota, Florida, in April 1932, leaving behind a legacy marked by both triumphs and controversies in the world of law enforcement. Mary Fagan was born on June 1, 1899, into a humble Georgia family of tenant farmers. Tragically, her father passed away before she came into the world. Following her birth, her mother, Frances Fagan, relocated the family to their hometown of Marietta, Georgia. However, sometime around or after 1907, they moved once more, settling in East Point, Georgia, located in southwest Atlanta. There, Frances opened a boarding house to support her family. Mary's childhood was marked by hardship, as she left school at the tender age of 10 to contribute to the family's income by working part-time in a textile mill. By 1912, after her mother married John William Coleman, the family moved into the bustling city of Atlanta. It was during this time that Mary, now a young teenager, sought employment to support her family. In the spring of that year, Mary secured a job at the National Pencil Company, a local establishment where she earned a meager wage of 10 cents an hour. Her duties involved operating a knurling machine, which inserted rubber erasers into the metal tips of pencils. Despite her youth, Mary worked diligently, putting in long hours, often totaling 55 hours per week. Coincidentally, Mary's workstation was situated just across the hallway from the office of Leo Frank, a superintendent at the National Pencil Company. This proximity would later intertwine their fates in a tragic and infamous manner. The tragic events surrounding Mary Fagan's death unfolded on April 21, 1913, when she was laid off from her job at the National Pencil Company due to a shortage of materials. Determined to collect her pay, Mary visited the factory around noon on April 26. The following day, in the early hours of the morning, the factory's night watchman, Newt Lee, ventured into the basement to use the restroom. To his horror, he stumbled upon Mary Fagan's lifeless body near an incinerator and immediately contacted the authorities. The scene was grisly and horrifying. Mary's dress was pulled up around her waist, with a strip from her petticoat wrapped tightly around her neck. Her face bore scratches and was disfigured, while her head showed signs of severe bruising. A strip of wrapping cord was tied into a loop around her neck, indicating she had been strangled. Despite the brutal assault, her underwear remained around her hips, albeit torn and stained with blood. The basement itself showed signs of struggle, with Mary's skin covered in ashes and dirt, suggesting a fierce altercation had taken place. Investigating officers noted evidence of tampering, with a service ramp leading to a sliding door that opened into an alley. Bloody fingerprints were found on the door, alongside a metal pipe that had been used to force entry. Among the debris near Mary's body, investigators discovered 2 notes, later dubbed the murder notes. These notes implicated the night watchman, Newt Lee, who was black. One of the notes mentioned a long tall black Negro, leading to Lee's immediate arrest. However, Lee protested his innocence, suggesting that the notes were an attempt to frame him. Despite his familiarity with the crime scene, Lee insisted he had stumbled upon Mary's body by chance. Nevertheless, suspicions mounted, especially when Lee's apparent trail leading back to the elevator suggested he had moved the body. The investigation into Mary Fagan's murder became increasingly complex and contentious, with the circumstances surrounding her death shrouded in mystery and suspicion. As the investigation into Mary Fagan's murder progressed, authorities initially arrested Newt Lee, the factory's night watchman, and a friend of Fagan's, suspecting their involvement in the crime. However, doubts arose about their culpability, leading the police to reconsider their theory. By Monday, the focus shifted to the second floor of the factory, where Leo Frank's office was located. Evidence, including hair found on a lathe and suspicious stains on the floor, suggested the possibility of foul play on this level. Suspicion soon turned to Leo Frank himself. On Sunday, April 27, the police attempted to contact Frank multiple times, but their efforts were in vain. When they finally reached him, Frank exhibited signs of extreme nervousness, which intensified when he was informed of Fagan's murder. Despite initially not being considered a suspect, Frank's behavior raised eyebrows among investigators. On Monday, April 28, Frank provided a written deposition to the police, detailing his activities on the day of the murder. However, discrepancies in his account, coupled with his nervous demeanor, raised further suspicion. Frank's attorney, Luther Rosser, insisted on demonstrating Frank's lack of injuries and the absence of blood on his clothing, further fueling speculation. Frank enlisted the services of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency to investigate the case and prove his innocence. However, unbeknownst to him, one of the detectives, Harry Scott, had close ties to the police and harbored doubts about Frank's innocence. On Tuesday, April 29, police discovered a blood-stained shirt at Lee's residence, further implicating Frank in the crime. This discovery, coupled with mounting suspicion and a series of incriminating factors, led to Frank's arrest later that morning. A coroner's inquest held on Wednesday, April 30, saw testimony from Frank and other witnesses. Despite attempts to corroborate Frank's alibi, doubts persisted, especially regarding his alleged interactions with Fagan and other women. In May, renowned detective William J. Burns traveled to Atlanta to offer assistance in the case. However, his agency withdrew later that month, disillusioned by the societal implications and political entanglements surrounding the investigation. The notion that Frank, a wealthy Jew, was able to evade justice fueled public outrage and complicated the pursuit of truth in the case. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Jim Conley, the factory's janitor, who many historians believe to be the actual perpetrator of the murder. Conley first attracted suspicion when he was observed washing red stains out of a blue work shirt shortly after the murder. Although initial tests on the shirt revealed no blood, further investigation later implicated Conley. It was discovered that he could read and write, and his spelling matched that found on the incriminating murder notes. Conley's story initially fluctuated, but on May 24, he confessed to writing the notes under Frank's direction. He claimed that Frank had summoned him to his office the day before the murder, dictated the notes, and instructed him to leave the factory afterward. Subsequent statements from Conley further implicated Frank, alleging that Frank had confessed to him and directed the disposal of Fagan's body. Despite skepticism from some officials at the pencil company, Conley's revised account gained traction, with major newspapers giving it front-page coverage. However, doubts lingered, especially concerning inconsistencies in Conley's narrative and his failure to mention his awareness of the crime when writing the notes. Efforts to arrange a confrontation between Frank and Conley fell through when Frank exercised his right to refuse without his attorney present. The police viewed this as further evidence of Frank's guilt, although it was within his legal rights. Conley's legal representation, William Manning Smith, believed in Conley's final affidavit but grew concerned about his client's interactions with reporters and the influence of media bias. Smith's efforts to protect Conley's interests culminated in his decision to sever ties with the newspaper that had hired him and arrange for Conley's relocation to a different jail. Ultimately, on February 24, 1914, Conley was sentenced to a year in jail for his involvement in covering up Fagan's murder. Despite Conley's conviction, questions surrounding the case persisted, casting a shadow of uncertainty over the true events of that fateful day. On May 23, 1913, a grand jury convened and indicted Leo Frank for the murder of Mary Fagan, despite scant evidence. The trial commenced on July 28, drawing crowds to the Fulton County Superior Court. The prosecution, led by Hugh Dorsey, painted Jim Conley as a credible witness, alleging Frank's guilt and detailing a complex conspiracy. Conversely, Frank's defense team, comprising 8 lawyers, vehemently refuted the prosecution's narrative, presenting witnesses to dispute the timeline and question Conley's credibility. Central to the trial were conflicting accounts of Frank's whereabouts and actions on the day of the murder. Prosecution witnesses testified to seeing Frank in his office around the time Fagan was murdered, while the defense sought to establish Frank's innocence through alibis and character witnesses. The prosecution's reliance on Stover's testimony regarding Frank's absence during the alleged murder clashed with other accounts placing Frank elsewhere. Despite intense cross-examination, Conley's testimony remained consistent, bolstering the prosecution's case. The defense contested Conley's credibility and attempted to undermine his narrative. The trial also scrutinized the timeline of events leading up to Fagan's murder, with both sides presenting witnesses to support their respective versions. As the trial unfolded, the courtroom drama intensified, with each side fiercely advocating its position. Witnesses provided conflicting testimonies, raising doubts about the reliability of the evidence presented. Despite the defense's efforts to challenge the prosecution's case, the trial remained mired in uncertainty, leaving the jury to grapple with the complexities of the legal proceedings. During the trial, the prosecution alleged witness tampering by Frank's legal team, while the defense claimed intimidation of the jury. On August 25, 1913, the jury found Frank guilty after a brief deliberation. Dorsey was hailed as a hero upon leaving the courthouse, celebrated by a jubilant crowd. The following day, Frank was sentenced to death by hanging. The defense protested, citing public influence on the verdict. Appeals were based on procedural errors rather than a re-evaluation of evidence. Despite objections, the Georgia Supreme Court upheld Frank's conviction in February 1914. The defense continued to fight, uncovering inconsistencies in witness testimony and raising constitutional issues. Despite efforts, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Frank's appeal in April 1915, with Holmes expressing doubts about the fairness of the trial. The legal battle highlighted concerns about due process and public influence in the justice system. On April 22, 1915, Frank's request for a commutation of his death sentence was denied by a narrow vote. The case then landed on the desk of Governor John Slayton, whose term was ending soon. Slayton conducted extensive hearings, scrutinizing evidence and visiting the crime scene. He faced immense pressure from both sides, including over 1,000 death threats. Slayton's investigation highlighted inconsistencies in Conley's testimony and raised doubts about the murder notes. He questioned whether the elevator could have been used as Conley described and examined handwriting evidence. Slayton also considered analysis suggesting the notes were written in the basement, not Frank's office. Ultimately, Slayton concluded that Frank's conviction was based on shaky evidence and commuted his death sentence. However, his decision was met with outrage, especially from those who believed Frank was guilty. The case remained a source of controversy, with debates over due process and the influence of public opinion in the justice system. Slayton's thorough review of the case brought several key points to light. He questioned the reliability of Conley's testimony, highlighting inconsistencies and suggesting ulterior motives behind some of his claims. Slayton also pointed out discrepancies in the timeline of events and raised doubts about the murder notes, indicating they might have been composed in the basement, not Frank's office. Ultimately, Slayton decided to commute Frank's death sentence to life imprisonment. His decision sparked outrage, especially among those who believed Frank was guilty. The case stirred deep-seated tensions, including issues of class, ethnicity, and regional identity. Despite efforts by various prominent figures and organizations to support Frank, including a significant public relations campaign, he remained a polarizing figure. Tom Watson, a prominent editor, added fuel to the fire with impassioned attacks in his publication, exacerbating existing social tensions. The Frank case became emblematic of broader societal conflicts, including economic resentment, racial tensions, and the clash between traditional values and industrial progress. The complexity of these factors made it difficult to disentangle the true motivations behind the public's reaction to Frank's plight. The commutation of Frank's sentence by Governor Slayton ignited strong reactions, particularly from Tom Watson, who openly advocated for Frank's lynching. A group known as the Vigilance Committee planned and executed Frank's abduction from prison on August 16, 1915. They transported him to Marietta, where he was lynched, his body left on display for the public. The lynching of Frank garnered widespread attention and condemnation, temporarily halting other acts of lynching. It also sparked controversy and debate, with many seeing Frank as a victim of anti-Semitic persecution. His case led to the establishment of the Anti-Defamation League and prompted significant changes within the Jewish community in the South. Despite overwhelming evidence suggesting Frank's innocence, the case has been exploited by neo-Nazis and anti-Semites, perpetuating conspiracy theories and misinformation. The prevailing consensus among historians is that Frank was wrongly convicted, but the case continues to be a focal point for those promoting anti-Jewish views. In 1982, Alonzo Mann, who had been Leo Frank's office boy at the time of Mary Fagan's murder, came forward with new testimony to the Tennessean. Mann claimed to have seen Jim Conley alone, shortly after noon, carrying Fagan's body through the lobby toward the basement ladder. While Mann's testimony was not definitive, it prompted an effort by Charles Wittenstein and Dale Schwartz to obtain a posthumous pardon for Frank from the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles. Despite reviewing the files from Governor Slayton's commutation decision, the board denied the pardon in 1983, citing the inability to conclusively determine Frank's guilt or innocence. In 1986, Frank's supporters submitted a second application for pardon, asking the state to acknowledge its culpability over his death. This time, the board granted the pardon, stating that it was not addressing Frank's guilt or innocence but recognizing the state's failure to protect him and bring his killers to justice. The Atlanta Constitution characterized it as Leo Frank being lynched a second time. This decision was seen as a step toward healing old wounds, as noted by an editorial in the Miami Herald by Fred Grimm. In 2008, a state historical marker was erected near the site where Frank was lynched, commemorating the tragic event. Additionally, in 2015, another marker was dedicated to Governor John M. Slayton, honoring his role in the case, signaling a continued effort to acknowledge and remember this dark chapter in Georgia's history. Detective William J. Burns played a significant role in investigating the Leo Frank case. He was hired by Frank's defense team to conduct his own independent investigation into the murder of Mary Fagan. Burns was a renowned detective with a reputation for thoroughness and professionalism. Burns's investigation uncovered new evidence and witnesses that cast doubt on the prosecution's case against Frank. He conducted interviews, gathered testimonies, and reviewed the existing evidence with meticulous detail. His findings contributed to the mounting evidence suggesting that Jim Conley, a key witness for the prosecution, may have been the actual perpetrator of the crime. Additionally, Burns's reputation as a respected investigator lent credibility to Frank's defense efforts. His involvement brought attention to the case and raised doubts about the fairness of Frank's trial. Burns's findings were instrumental in fueling public debate and advocacy for Frank's innocence. Ultimately, Detective Burns's investigative work added weight to the campaign for Leo Frank's exoneration and posthumous pardon. His efforts, along with those of others involved in the case, contributed to the eventual acknowledgement of the injustice done to Frank and the granting of a pardon by the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles.